So you missed cycle one. So now what? What's so my intent in my presentation today is to catch you up on speed. So where are we at in the flood planning process? First of all, this is a picture of our flood planning group from the last cycle. If you see them today, say hello, introduce yourselves. We want y'all to get involved. So this September 2024, the flood plan is going to be delivered to the state legislature. And then in 2024, this September, the second cycle starts right on the heels of that delivery of the first flood plan. So we're about to get started on the second cycle. And then in 2025, we start making updates to the plan. We submit to the Water Development Board our needs, updating of our needs, our goals, and solutions to flood risk. In January of 2026, the flood planning group will submit studies to be performed by the Water Development Board. So this is an interesting twist in the second cycle where the Water Development Board is going to be asking us, well, how can we help and do some of the work for you? And then in February of 2027, that's when the second cycle is going to be, a draft's going to be submitted. And then we all wrap up in January of 2028, and we submit the final flood plan. So why do we plan? There's an adage that, an ounce of prevention is better than the cure. Texas has had a long history of dramatic and severe flood events. Harvey definitely spurred the need to be more proactive with planning. So we're here to help reduce future flood risk through planning. So how do we do this? I want to emphasize this is watershed based. So this is for the Nueces Basin. It doesn't follow political boundaries, so cities, county boundaries. This is a watershed type approach, and it's bottom up. So it starts with folks in this room. You all know the flood problems better than anyone else, and the identifying the flood issues starts on the local level, and the solutions come up from the local level and end up in the flood plan. So it's definitely bottom up. So that's why we need good collaboration in the basin. And the heart of the plan is we identify the flood risk, and we determine what the greatest needs are in terms of addressing that flood risk, and then we find and recommend solutions. Hold on. Oh, there it goes. Just a little lag on my end. All right. So okay, so this is where we landed on the last flood plan. We were able to map floodplains within the whole basin. A lot of the basin before this did not have either didn't have floodplains mapped or didn't have accurate information. So we pulled together the best available information, and we're able to define floodplains across the basin, which is kind of what you see on the map to the right. And it's two different levels of accuracy. So some of the areas of the basins have very accurate mapping and others not so accurate mapping, but we pulled together the best available data. And just a quick summary on some of the key stats. We have over 61,000 structures identified in the floodplain. A population of 144,000 folks are at risk of flooding. And then we have 2,300 roadway crossings and 3,200 miles of roadways in the floodplain. So that's quite a big flood risk in the basin. So looking at where the greatest needs are in the basin, we pulled all the data we had together and put together this map you see here. So the darker shades are areas where the highest flood risk was identified in need. And we did that based on the data we had. So we took data like where historical damage happened, where injuries have occurred, buildings in floodplain, critical facilities in the floodplain, where are our low water crossings, where is there potential for life loss. We took all that data to create a map based on the flood risk. And this flood risk is based on watersheds. So these are the watersheds where the greatest flood risk was identified. And then we recommended solutions. So the map here of Texas, all those blue dots are where projects have been recommended in the state of Texas. In the Nueces Basin, we recommended 31 projects compared to 615 projects that were recommended across the state. So we use certain terms. The solutions come in three buckets, and we call them flood management evaluations, or FMEs, which are basically your studies. You have your flood mitigation projects, or your FMPs. And then lastly, we have flood management strategies, which is a term used for solutions that don't have a capital cost, that don't quite fall under the studies or projects. So as you can see there, we had $1.2 billion worth of projects identified in the basin, $285 million worth of studies. So quite a bit of work was done in the first cycle. So there is funding on the state level. There's the Flood Infrastructure Funds, or FIF funding. You must be in the state flood plan to be eligible for this funding. The 88th legislation session provided $624 million in additional funding for FIF, and $375 is available for the 2024-2025 fiscal year. 188 million of that is in grants, and the rest is in 0% loans. Applications were due this past April, and many folks from the Nueces Basin did submit on that, which I'll show you in a second. And then invitations for full application will be announced this fall. So we'll find out how successful entities were in obtaining funding later this year. So a little bit more about FIF grant eligibility. So you can obtain grant funds to do studies and projects. There's a lot on this slide, but I will say it's a sliding scale based on your average median household income. So for example, if you have a study in the plan and your average median household income is less than 50% of the state average, you're eligible up to 100% grants. And there's a sliding scale there, so you can see the higher your income is, the less grant eligibility you have. And there's also important to know, there's credits for being a rural community, and there's also credits for implementing green or nature-based solutions into your solutions. So if grants, if you can't get all grants, you have to have a local match. Well, how do you do that? Your local share can be cash, it can be in-kind services, or it could be a loan from the Water Development Board. So this is a lot. How do you navigate this? Well, I would say lean on people in this room. There's engineers and grant specialists that will help you through this process, that do this on a frequent basis and can help you with that. So this is how our basin stands on the current FIF cycle. We had 24 applications submitted, with many entities participating, as you can see the list. So hopefully we receive some funding. Good news this fall. So turning this back to you, what if you have, again, this is a grassroots program. It starts with local knowledge. So what if you have a flood problem? What do you do? I would encourage you to participate in the flood plan. And this is looks pretty complicated, but essentially, it starts with a flood problem. You have a flood problem. Do you have good information or knowledge of that flood problem? If you don't, this process diagram is going to push you to do more study. Do you have solutions? Have you identified a solution to your flood problem? If you haven't, then this diagram will push you to do more study. If you do have a solution, does it have a capital cost? If so, then you kind of head towards a project. And in all projects, you cannot have a negative impact on your neighbors. So if your flood solution causes more flooding downstream to another flood problem area, then that's not eligible. The state checks for that. And then your projects have to meet the state requirements for flood planning. And a lot of that has to do with benefit cost analysis. So you have to define that, and there's some work to be done there. Again, if you have a solution but there's no capital cost, like an education campaign, that would typically fall under the flood mitigation strategy. So just wanted to say, last cycle, we identified a great need in Crystal City. There was a flood-prone area of town that hadn't been studied well. So the flood planning group worked with the city on that. We did a feasibility study as part of the planning cycle, and we worked with the city to identify a solution, and that resulted in the Downtown Crystal City Regional Detention Improvement Project, and that project was submitted for a fifth abridged application this past April. And so it's a good example of a community leveraging and working with the flood planning cycle to solve a problem. So hopefully we'll see if they get funded and keep working towards a solution on that problem area of town. But I encourage others to get involved, work with the flood planning group. So you missed the 2024 fifth application, now what? So what do? There's going to be more opportunities in the future. So the next opportunity is in fiscal year 2026. And all this relies on continued state funding. So I would encourage you to reach out to your representatives, state representatives, and really advocate to continue funding the fifth fund. There's also opportunities between now and then. Again, the flood planning cycle is about to start up. And so the flood planning group does do some studies internally to the flood planning process like we did for Crystal City. So there is that opportunity. And then there's also, like I said earlier, the state is looking for us to submit studies that they can perform. I think they're interested in helping rural and communities with some of their flood problems. And so they're looking for opportunities to do that. So that also is another opportunity. So this is my last slide. I'd really like to turn it back over to the panel. So I hope y'all have been thinking about some good questions on flood planning, but we really want to encourage folks to get involved. I'll just lead with, there's going to be upcoming road shows where we go out in the basin and hopefully create collaboration amongst the cities and counties in the basin. And then we have our meetings. So there's going to, and on there some of the future meetings. There's opportunities to participate in committees. We've had committees break off on certain topics that are of interest to the flood planning group, so you can always get involved, join a committee, and we want your information. Again, this is grassroots. We need to know from people on the ground in the basin. And we have a website there. That's always a good place to go to gain more information. And then lastly, I put some of the contacts that are involved. So with that, I guess I'm going to start off with an easy question to our panel is how best can people get involved in the flood plan?
Okay, I'll get us started. You've got to fight for your right for funding. I just had a Taylor Swift moment. It's really critical that you heed Brian's warning that the eligibility to get funding starts by being in the plan. Now, yesterday I sat intently watching who was in the room, and we have amazing experts, as you noted. Half of the room are consultants, experts in engineering of various types, mainly civil and environmental, and others are the recipients of the governance piece of it, right? We are the ones that, in my past and in your present, are working on solutions. So here are a few notes that I wrote down that I really think are important. First, I have a few memorized. If you are not on the Texas Water Development Board mailing list, raise your hand. Okay, you've got to get on it. It's okay. I don't. Doesn't matter if you're on it or not right now. And it's not a. It's the point of you've got to get notified so that you understand when those deadlines come up. And I think that's an important concept for you guys to know is that there are no secrets in government. We have an open and transparent process. And so it's incumbent upon all of us, from consultants to commissioners, to get involved and find out what funding is available when. And before I pass it off, I also want to harp on something called the local share. If you're a governmental entity and you do not know what your AHMI is, you better find out. You better know that number every day that ends in Y, because it's going to determine in most cases, your eligibility for funding. You also need to know who your collaborators are with. I've never seen a great project that hasn't had a list, a laundry list of great collaborators. Currently, if you were here last year, you remember Director Reem Zoom. She gave a great presentation from the Water Development Board. They're working on a new fund that will focus on rural and small communities. So you need to be aware of when that actually comes to fruition, because it's our rural and small communities that need help the most. You also need to have shovel-ready projects. That doesn't mean that there isn't money for feasibility studies and planning. There absolutely is. But you also need to have in your bag of goodies shovel-ready projects. Do you have updated budgets? Do you know what the local share would be? You say, well, I don't know that. Yeah, you do. Because on page 16 of your Water Development Board FIF paperwork that you can see online today, and if you need help, come see us later during the lunch hour. We'll show it to you. You can calculate right now what your most probable eligibility will be in percentages. And once you know that number, and I'm not picking on my friends from McMullen, I'm just jealous. Unless you can just take it from general revenue, you need a plan of action. Do you have a financial advisor? If you don't, get one so that they can figure out how you can borrow either from the Water Development Board or other governmental options available to you under the law. Or you can leverage your in-kind services with your own engineering department, with your academians from your local universities. So you've got to understand what you are, where you are, and get those shovel-ready projects. If you have not found a consultant to help you prepare these grants, get an RFQ out now. Make certain that your consultant is an expert in the field, not just a grant writer. Grant writers are amazing and they're very helpful, but you need a special grant writer, somebody who can really understand how to administer and take you through the process of requests for reimbursements, because you're going to be funding these grants and then get reimbursed. I'll leave it at that, pass it to Andrew, but I just want to say you do have to fight for funding, and it starts with advocacy and resolutions in your hometowns. The best politics is local, so go get those resolutions, get them ready for what Chairman Hunter says is going to be a good water session, and we're going to go get a couple more $1 billion. And that is why we're here, is to help each other with the resources. And I look forward to working with you guys in Region 13. And let me introduce Andy, who is our Vice Chairman for Region 13's Flood Mitigation Group.
Thank you, Barbara. As she had mentioned, first part of this process, if you didn't see any of your communities on that list of projects that are going to be funded this cycle, and you want to get involved for this next cycle, the clock starts. We're going to start working on that starting this September. And we're going to be looking at submitting a plan that's going to be 2028. So if you're going to be looking at funding, you need to start now. And the people in the room are the people you need to be talking to, either the consultants around the room, anybody on the board, and we can start putting plans together for you. Because if you don't have a project that's in the plan, you're not going to get funding for it. And funding is a key part of this. These projects are not cheap, and so state funding is a huge benefit to all of these programs. And what we're really trying to do is just reduce everybody's flood risk. I know you've probably seen flood maps. These flood maps don't identify the only risk. I'm an engineer by training, and I worked on some of the flooding in Houston after Tropical Storm Allison. And they were amazed to find out that the majority of the flooding occurred outside of the FEMA floodplains. So just because you have an area that's not in a FEMA floodplain does not mean that it's immune from flooding. So that's where the studies can come into play, help you identify where the actual flood risks are. you also wonder, well, is flooding a bad thing? We always think it's bad. It hurts people. Flooding is a natural event. Matter of fact, part of the reason that we migrate towards these flood-prone areas, they've got fertile soils, which was brought over millions of years of depositing sediments and such. So floodplains serve a purpose, and I think it's important that we realize that we need to manage how we interact with these floodplains. Part of it is we need to reduce our risk, stay out of the floodplain some. There's some areas where we can't avoid the flood risk, and we have to construct projects to help people from getting hurt. But there's ways that we can reduce the risk, minimizing costs, and still allowing the floodplains to do what they're supposed to. And this is something that Lauren, I think, has a very good background in. She understands these natural solutions, and maybe if you'd like to discuss some of those.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so like Andy said, so I work for the Nature Conservancy. I sit on the flood planning group. I've been on the flood planning group since its inception, and seen, all of the progress that we've made over the past several years. With the Nature Conservancy, we advocate strongly for natural and nature-based solutions to mitigate flood problems. It's not going to solve all the problems, but like was mentioned earlier, you can get extra points for your projects if they include a nature-based solution. It also opens up a lot of funding opportunities for you. So you can apply for lots of different federal funding opportunities through NOAA, through NIFWIF, through FEMA, BRIC, lots of different opportunities to even do planning studies to try to come up with projects to pitch to the flood planning group to get into the flood plan, and ultimately to also qualify for state funding as well. So nature-based solutions, they can help to alleviate the problem, and they also open up a lot of different opportunities. What did I want to mention? Oh, so just a little bit of background. A lot of the different regions included goals related to nature-based solutions. Many of them did not. We are lucky in that the Nueces region really did emphasize the importance of nature-based solutions. And, because you do get more points through flood planning, it's good that we have a goal that addresses those nature-based solutions as well. We didn't have nature-based solutions projects in the plan. So one of my personal goals over the next several years is to try to fund projects to try to generate ideas for flood planning, planning projects that integrate nature-based solutions and get them into the plan. We can look to some of our neighbors, for example, in Region 12, the region just north of us, where they took their projects, they looked at which ones they could integrate nature-based solutions into to make them hybrid projects, which makes them more competitive for funding. So that's another thing that we could look at in this region to really generate projects not only that are more competitive for funding, but that provide those other co-benefits, like water quality benefits, like benefits to to biodiversity, and also just recreational opportunities for people who live in those communities who might rather have a park that is beautiful and green, that filters water and mitigates flood, than a concrete ditch, for example. So, they provide a lot of benefits. We have a lot of great examples from the state flood planning process that we can work off of for this next iteration of the process. And we really are working hard to get some more of those nature-based solutions into the plan. So if you're interested in any of that, please find me, and I'd love to talk to you. And I know we've mentioned that some of our flood planning members are in the room, but maybe if you're here, maybe you can just stand up or raise your hand. I saw some earlier, and I'm not seeing them now. Oh, there's Mr. Williams. I saw Javier. Oh, there's Sarah Williams. Javier was here. I don't see him anymore. Anyways, so feel free to seek us out and talk to us if you're interested in getting involved. And I guess we might open it up for questions if we have any questions in the audience.
Yes, we have a few questions from the audience. And reminder that you can ask any question by clicking on this link from your phone, or raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. Let's see. One of the first questions is developing a comprehensive drainage plan essential to the flood planning group.
Yeah, it's absolutely essential, and there are funds available for you to apply to get that drainage plan. In fact, in 2019, we did something just incredible as a state. We, by constitutional amendment, said we wish to place dollars for this purpose. And I can really relate to this because the coastal bend had, of course, has multiple watersheds, but we took the upstream watersheds of Jim Wells County through Nueces and down to Clayburgh, which drains to Baffin Bay, which is a very targeted bay that needs a lot of help because of its nitrogen loading. And we created a comprehensive master drainage plan. Out of that plan came over 30 projects, but 15 of them became eligible inside our Region 13 plan. That means 15 projects can go up for funding. But here's the reality. Without preparation, only 2 of those projects out of the 15 actually made it to the April 15th abridged application. So one piece of it is critical, but I want to emphasize, while you need to make certain that your plan using the latest and greatest modeling, right? You want to have a holistic approach. Don't stop. Execute. Follow through. So out of our Region 13's 31 projects, Travis, I think only 6 are flood mitigation projects, FMPs. Well, that's disappointing. So I want to create new goals for Region 13 that we have a strong showing of actual projects. And the reason I think that there were so few projects is because there's so many of us in South Texas that need plans. So we do want to make certain that the plans come first so that you know what you're tackling. And then, of course, encourage you to get those plans into grants for these projects.
Okay. How can the Regional Flood Planning Group help my community develop a flood management project? And I think that might be what you talked a little bit about, the Crystal City, how the Flood Planning Group help with that. How can, in the next planning cycle, can other communities take advantage of that opportunity?
Well, I think it starts with getting involved in the next cycle. So again, people in this room know their flood issues, and if you coordinate and leverage the flood planning cycle, you could possibly have the flood planning group help with your study. And that was done on a limited basis last planning cycle. Some funds were set aside by the state to actually do some studies for areas of greatest need that haven't had studies done to date, so they didn't have any planning done. The way that worked really was cooperation. We had a road show, and folks showed up, and they brought their issues to the table, and they worked with the flood planning group. That's one way. There is limited funds, but there is opportunity there in the future. So that's what I would encourage. Let your issues be known. We want to hear the information you have. No one knows, no one knows where flood issues are the biggest, except for the locals who've lived through it and been there. So bring those issues forward and work with the flood planning group for solutions. There's a process there. It's been used in the past. It's going to be available again in cycle 2. And so the flood planning group will have to make a decision on which studies to perform within the second planning cycle. So that's one way I would encourage that.
I just want to emphasize attending the upcoming road shows. So I was able to attend the ones that we had, or one of them that we had during planning cycle 1. And I was really impressed with how many people showed up who brought ideas to the table. There was lots of conversation about issues that different communities were having. There was an opportunity for people to connect with others having similar issues, and some who had even generated ideas. And so it's also an opportunity to connect with other communities nearby that are having similar issues that might be a little bit further along in the process than you are. So I don't think we have the date set. We might, but we will have them up on the website. And I really encourage you all to come out to those roadshows.
Yeah, that kind of follows into the next question about what is the roadshow. So I'll help kind of maybe start on some of that. So what we developed when we started the first planning cycle is the state tasked us with this planning cycle, but you can see how big our planning region is. So to get everybody to come to one meeting location was not realistic. So what we developed is we cut the region into 4 planning groups. We had the upper basin, the upper mid, the lower mid, and then the lower basin. And what we did is we did shows in each one of those areas. So we had one, I believe it was in Sinton for the lower basin, and then Tilden for the lower mid basin. Catula hosted us for the upper mid, and then Lakey hosted us for the upper basin. So that's what we'll do is we're gonna host meetings again in the fall at those different locations so that you don't have to drive to Corpus or you don't have to drive to Uvalde or anything like that to come to these meetings. And you can really talk, we're gonna spend specific time just on your local communities and what we can do there. If you wanna add anything to that, Brian or team.
Just that we're going to be here. We want you to come and visit with us. If you did miss cycle 1, you want to get ready for FY26. That's your next, time. Please seek us out. That's really so important, I think, to all of us. We also have examples of what does a drainage plan, a master drainage plan, look like for Tri-County. I brought the executive summary with me. So I think that's really important. The road shows are going to be out there for everybody to attend, but we're here now, and there's people in the room like the American Flood Coalition. If you're not a member, get to be a member. It's free, and they are a wealth of information. Think of it as a Rolodex for flood funding. The state of Texas is one incredible way, but we have our federal partners in the room. They are here to share information and knowledge about federal funding programs. So I just want you to know that the reason we put this panel together was to help you get the information that you need by showing real world examples.
I also want to add that those of you who were here yesterday and we were talking about water supply issues and some of the state projects that are going on that the Water Development Board is funding with their regional water planning, there's some overlap between some of these projects. And so where they arise, we try to work together with these other groups and find there may be projects that can serve both needs. So we're trying to be efficient with this whole process. So even if you're engaged with water supply, we can still work with y'all.
All right. You guys are doing a great job. There's a lot of questions filing in now. All right. So what about county and city regulations? Does a planning group have any references or guides for them?
So the most important thing I'd say is that when you apply, I'm assuming it's in relation to FIF funding, but if I'm misreading your question, stop us. But the most important thing is when you apply for these grants have a huge set of rules from application all the way to reimbursement. And you will sign a contract with the state of Texas. So it's also important to understand that getting ready for that opportunity requires knowledge and information, but they're there to help you every step of the way. So I don't necessarily think of it as regulation, Travis, as I think as a contract with the state.
I think they maybe been more online of like ordinances, ordinances to stop.
And if I can mention something to that, there's some ordinances that communities have to establish to become part of the FEMA's flood program, to be part of the flood insurance program. Those are minimum standards, and communities are allowed to come up with higher standards to help reduce their flood risk. Things like increasing freeboards, things for where people can develop, how they develop. So those sort of regulations aren't necessarily part of our plan, but those are something that can be definitely included in recommendations to communities, things you can do to reduce future flood risks. by beefing up your ordinances.
And I think we included some of those recommendations, but we don't have any power to impose regulations on anyone or include certain requirements for regulations in the plan, but we can make recommendations.
Yeah, in the flood plan we developed, we did have a chapter on regulations, and I think that came out of when we asked for information from all the communities. We had quite a few communities, a very large number that had ordinances and regulations that were greater than 30 years old, and they do need to be updated. So we did have a section on that. So if that's something your community is interested in, the plan, you can look at our plan for those types of
I will say that, you know, you saw in the slides earlier, we have 70,000 buildings in the floodplain in the basin. And the best prevention is in the future is not to add to that. So I will say regulations and floodplain management is probably one of the more important parts. It's expensive to buy our way out of past problems. You know, we built in places that are put, you know, infrastructure at risk. And so there is a chapter, again, we don't enforce it. It's more of a recommendation, but we pulled together the best practices in the basin and put together some recommendations. For example, we recommended finished floor elevations in the basin be at least 1 foot above the base flood elevations. That was a recommendation. There's a lot of other recommendations in the flood planning. And then there's a lot of folks in the basin that went above and beyond. And the flood plan does a good job of bringing all that data together. So you can see what your neighbors and other communities are doing across the basin. So we hope that improve that greatly in the second cycle. We have another chance to tackle that issue and advance it further.
And just like Travis, just like we have economic development look at, you know, power and water needs, they also need to look at, I think, you know, flood mitigation needs as part of their overall package. So if you represent economic development, this is an important piece of, you know, the overall, what is your best site selection or site location? This is a component that shouldn't be ignored.
Next question. Do all counties in Region 13 have county-wide drainage districts to fund storm water projects?
As the former Nueces County judge, no. No, and they're very difficult to obtain because after the fact, nobody wants to tax themselves, even though they know what a tremendous challenge it is. So this is the conundrum. I believe, you know, there are some that have drainage districts. I can tell you that our partners to the south in Hidalgo County, a very large county, has received a tremendous wealth of funding because they're able to match, right? They're able to produce that local share because they have a tax base from which to do it. These are difficult, you know, questions and challenges, but I can tell you that Nueces does not.
I guess this is going to be a topic. The next one is for something that's happening as we speak. Does North Beach have a project submitted in the Region 13 plan?
It does not. It does not. And once again, you saw the tally of Brian, how many billion was our?
1.2 billion of projects.
Okay, so just our Nueces Basin had 1.2 billion in our in projects, and the entire state has 1 billion to give. That's our challenge. And then I mentioned the 6 projects. Only 2 are from those 3 counties. But there are some excellent projects. If you want to see the top projects that were submitted, please find us. We do have a listing of those. And I see Victor's here from Drainage District number 2. He represents 2 of those really important projects totaling over $60 million for a historically problematic area in the Robstown area. So since I was a little girl, it's been flooding the same way. And Victor and his team want to do something about it. And they're doing something about it because of FIF.
Yeah, I think that follows into one of the questions is that where can we find the forecast for the upcoming projects? So we do have a copy of that list. It's on our website as well. And just for people who are walking in, all the slides are going to be up on the Summit website, so that I know there's a lot of information, so it'll be easy for you to grab all that information by the end of the weekend. I'll have everything uploaded, so it's easy for you to grab that. The website does for the flood planning group does have all that information as well. It's on. It's a lot of information. We do have it broke down by county, so it's easy to you can go to click on your county to find your information. Now, as far as the list of projects, those are, I believe there are 13 projects I think in our region that got fifth submissions. Does that sound right?
And we were up to 24, well, overall studies and projects. I'd have to go back to that slide, but it's probably around that number.
I think around 13 of them got actually their fifth applications in, and with the Water Development Board will make those announcements, and usually in around August, they'll start their public hearings on which ones got funded. Flooding has impacts on health and economics. How does the Flood Planning Committee interact with the public health and economic development groups?
Well, you're absolutely right. It has an enormous impact. This morning, we're still in what's called an active situation in the Texas Division of Emergency Management. I spoke with Chief Pena, who runs this entire area, and he says we've already seen tremendous erosion from Cameron County all the way up to Aransas County. Erosion cost the state of Texas a tremendous amount of money. So even when, thank goodness, we've had no deaths and limited loss of livestock, it still causes a huge burden to the economy. So I think that the answer is through the Texas Division of Emergency Management. They participate, Travis, almost every single time on our virtual, platform. And we do follow the Open Meetings Act, so all of you can attend as well. But I would say that we interact very well with TDM, which interacts with that part of the health and public safety. And as for the economic development, each of us on the flood planning group represents a piece of economic development, from small business to water districts to large industries. And Andy, help me out. We've got a nice variety, and so I think each of us represents a piece of economic development.
Right, and we've got the public entities, river authorities, communities. We've got utilities. We've got small business. Trying to remember who else.
Environmental.
Environmental, yes, thank you. So we do cover on the board. We cover a number of these groups and activities. But if you have, once again, something that you would like to come in and participate, we openly encourage that. The best way to get involved in the process is to personally become a part of the process. These meetings are open to the public. We recommend that you take part, bring your input, and if you've got ideas for economic development for your community and you want to run them by us, we'd be glad to talk about them and see how we can help out.
Also, I want to put a plug in for Travis, Nueces River Authority and planning. The Nueces River Authority has the ability to help you write these grants. They have the ability to help you administer these grants. I don't know of a better gift that you could have as a smaller rural community than having your river authority step up for you. So please remember that it's not just about the meetings and getting ideas. We're here to help you follow through all the way to getting that funding.
Thank you, Judge. Are there any other questions from the audience?
John Byram with the NRA was recently with me in Washington, and we went over to Annapolis and met with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and talked about their issues and solutions. And they said, if you've got failing septic and sewer systems, $1 spent there is more effective than green infrastructure or nature-based solutions. If you're in a condition like Baffin Bay, which is a dying system, and the Heart Research Institute has source tracked the nutrients to human waste. So you can do nature-based solutions all day long, but if you don't have regional wastewater treatment facilities and fix your septic and sewer, you're going to lose. And that was from a group that's been around for 50 years. Now, I know there's many good nature-based solutions. I'd love to hear examples about them. And their nature, they're going to stay there, maybe longer than a cement block will stay there. But in situations like the OSO system and Baffin Bay, you're going to need big investments in infrastructure, built infrastructure.
Thank you, Tim. And we'll have some discussions about Baffin Bay and some of those things later this afternoon. Any other questions from the audience? Well, wonderful. Thank you guys so much. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you.